Welcome to another episode of Breaking into Cybersecurity, where we talk to cybersecurity professionals who have broken into the field and want to share the tips and tricks so that others in the field can follow in their footsteps. Today, we have Jim West, who is going to share his career, his tips and tricks. Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before you got into cyber and then what got you into the field?
Before I got into the cyber, I was always I'm the kid that likes to take apart toasters and radios and figure out how they work and see if I can make them work again once I put them back together. More unsuccessful than not, but I think it's being just a curious kid is what I started out as. But I was always curious about learning things, reading books. My love of reading, which I don't read as much as I used to when I was younger, but I was just fascinated by like Jules Verne. Of course, when I got a hold of Lord of the Rings, that was like something I would read once a year, but yeah, just being just curious, inquisitive, just trying to figure things out has been something that's driven me to every aspect of my career so far. But yeah, prior to cyber, it was just kind of figuring how do things work? Why do things work? And just from that drive, just in curiosity, learning more about it. But yeah, IT cyber was one of those things. I was like, hey, I get to work in air conditioned offices. I get to actually have a impact on the operations because everything today touches a computer. No matter what field you're in, what profession, every company, every business on the planet has to touch a computer at some point in their operations, some more than others. And just getting involved at an early stage in the early 90s was truly a great time to be in IT and cyber. As I'm sure you know, kind of going from like the 386, 286 CPU computers to now we're in the, such varying speeds that we just keep outpacing.
What was your first role and what were some of the things that you learned in that first role that were so pivotal for you?
My first money making job was I was building computers and towers out of my apartment. I was in Louisiana and just building computers for like doctors' offices, small lawyer offices. Cause back then you could build a computer for approximately $1,000, but you could turn around and sell it for three or $4,000. It was a very lucrative time to be customizing and building computers. But then my first job where I would work for a established company was a company called CompUSA, a business similar to like Best Buy, where they would sell computer components, computers. Their biggest sales were like Compaq was their partnership. And so one of the things that I got to do is I came in within the first month as what they call a bench technician, meaning you're the guy that's just doing memory upgrades for people, which is so easy. Back then, you just pop the clips, remove the memory, put the upgraded memory and pop it in, boot it up, make sure you can do a memory test. And then all of a sudden, 35, $45 later, the customer is in and out. So doing like basic memory swap outs or hard drive upgrades, et cetera, was kind of what I started the first month. But quickly, they saw that I excelled at that. And so by I think my third month, I was doing corporate work where I would go out to a customer site and do refresh projects with upgrading computers. And next thing you know, they're sending me to all kinds of training in school. So this is about 94, 95. And it was one month I would go to Houston for their compact ASC training. Another month they were sending me out to Arizona to Intel's facilities out there for training. It was an amazing few years where as long as I was ready to fly, get on a plane, they were sending me almost everywhere for a lot of paid training. So my first 2 years with CompUSA, I got so much training from so many prominent vendors at the time, so many early on certifications, because to do work on a piece of hardware back then, you had to be certified on that hardware. And it was particular down to the model printer, model server. And so back then I must have had 200 plus certifications to do warranty repair work on these various products. But it was really a fortunate time because the company really invested in me with flying me everywhere for training. I was a compact ASC. I was Intel LAN WAN expert. So I got a lot of great training early on in my career. So I would say my first 2 to 3 years of my career started with lots of training. And even to this day, I still do 400 to 600 CPE hours a year, part of what I've always been conditioned to do from the very beginning of my career.
As that role came to an end, or maybe you decided that you outgrew that role, what were some of the things that you did to move on and to find a new role that you would think would be helpful?
Someone had told me, hey, a company called DuPont Dow Elastomers, DDE, Place, Louisiana, where they have a big facility there, that they're hiring an IT coordinator. And at the time, I was working at the Baton Rouge store for CompUSA. And I was during the day, I was master technician in the shop, meaning I was doing most laptop repairs and server repairs. And then at night, I would go in the back of the store and I was teaching both the A plus class and the security plus class in the back. And so I was, making pretty decent money. And then someone said, "Hey, there's a great opportunity. It's called IT coordinator. Essentially, it's an IT manager for the chemical for the facility." So I said, "You know what? I'll show up for the interview just to get the experience of doing a formal interview." So I drive over to the base. I go into this big business lobby where I'm sitting in this room waiting area where there's guys that are wearing suit and ties. I was literally in my, if people remember CompUSA, they had the red collared polos. So I'm in my CompUSA polo and khakis. That's how unprepared I am for this interview. As I look at the guys in the room, there are guys wearing suit and ties. They got these portfolios and binders and folders and briefcases with like copies of their degrees, their certs, their CV. I mean, they're prepared. And I'm looking at these guys go, there is not a snowball's chance in hell that I'm going to, but I'm here for the experience. So one by one, we get called into a conference room where we're going against a panel interview. So when I get called in, I just go in just without any preparation, but I'm answering their questions and I'm being as truthful and honest as possible. Because a few weeks later, I get the call and they just give me an offer. I got the job. And I just couldn't believe it. It was like one of those dream moments, like I just won the lottery. Like, you're telling me I got my first salary job, 65,000 a year, which for Louisiana during the right before Y2K was like 1999. 65K was a lot of money then. I know a lot of people nowadays says, "Oh, that's nothing," but back then, trust me, it was the equivalent of making 100K today. So, which by some city standards, 100K is not enough either. I get it. But trust me, I think I was 22 years old, making 65K, it was phenomenal. And so I did really well. And then a few years later, I had the opportunity to transfer to the DuPont Regional Engineering Office in Houston. So I took that opportunity, went over there. And when I was there, one of my first 2 to 3 days on the job, I met with the head of the supply logistics. And we were having a one-on-one meeting because she was one of the most important facets of that office. And during this conversation, she goes, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I said, "No, ma'am, I don't." And she goes, "I was on your panel interview. I was visiting the plant management that day, and they asked me to sit on the interviews. And I was on that panel, and I'm the one that said you was the guy." And I said, "Well, what was it about me?" I was still, she goes, "I remember you was in your work uniform and while everybody else had their suits on. But when we asked you some really challenging questions, you was honest and said, 'I don't know the answer at the moment, but I can definitely research this and get back to you with options or with information.'" Everybody else tried to lie their way through it and try to go dance around the questions, but I immediately informed them. And she goes, "That kind of honesty is what we need at, we're dealing with critical infrastructure, dealing with things can cause cancer, carcinogens, or, oxidizers that can explode when they hit the air. When you're dealing with people's lives, you need brutal honesty. And if you don't know, you don't know. And that's okay not to know. But that's the honesty we need in an environment that's this critical." And she goes, "Everybody else that day just lied, danced around, and tiptoed around, but you was honest with us." And I told the folks that, "Look, this guy, he's sharp, but he also is honest, and that's more important than anything." So if I gave anybody any advice, if you are in an interview, some good tips are repeat the question so you can ensure that you are perceiving the question that they're intending the way you to perceive it. So that way you're both in agreement of what the question means or what you think the question means. That's one good tactic that I used even back then. Repeat the question and say, "From my understanding, you're seeking this type of answer." And then if you don't know the answer, say, "Even though I don't have direct expertise in this particular topic, I can tell you what I know of the topic, but in this situation, I would definitely have to inform you that I need to pull more information, do a little bit of research, and to present you with some courses of action based on that information that I would find." And trust me, transparency and honesty earns a lot of points with panel and interviewers because you got to trust in your people. You got to trust that they're always going to be as truthful as possible. So I would definitely say transparency and just being honest. In that case where I got my first salary job, it paid off in full because again, I did not have any belief that once I walked out that room, I was thinking, well, it was a great experience. But about 2 weeks later, when I got that offer, and then it took another 2+ years later before I found the reason why, and the reason why was my honesty.
I mean, as a consultant today, it's being that straightforward, being that truthful and trustworthy with the customer is what they need because they don't need someone going, "Oh, well, we got this. We can implement this in 3 weeks." And then you sign on the dotted line with them and they come in and then it's like, "Oh, well, we didn't take this into account. We didn't take that into account." So 3 months later, they're still working on the problem
Yeah.
because you picked the wrong vendor. So as you grew in your career, Jim, what were some of the things that you did to kind of progress your career and to get to those next goals? Were they maybe lucky career jumps, or did you put some strategy into how you grow your career?
With any kind of jobs and as opportunities present themselves, it's kind of like that preparation. Are you ready for the moment when opportunity and the timing comes together, right? You're either ready or you're not, right? So some of it is kind of pragmatic thinking or at least being prepared. But one of the things that anybody that's worked in IT cyber know that things are always changing, right? So being kind of, having that agility to kind of pivot whenever, maybe one sector of the business is kind of going through a change and the opportunities are over here now. So being able to pivot, I think is a crucial thing throughout a career of 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Now that I've hit 35 years, one of the things when I look back on is certifications obviously have been a big part of my career. So when I switched over to work in defense contracts, there was this doctrine called DoD 8570, which I know a lot of folks that are watching your podcast are very well aware of that doctrine. That kind of categorized different positions and different certs that check the box. And I do the air quotes not facetiously, but depending on the perspective, for me, I do value experience trumps certifications, trumps degrees. And I say it in that order because I think they all have their pros and cons. But at the end of the day, I'll take someone's direct hands on experience 10 out of 10 days of the week or 7 out of 7 days of the week. Certifications have some value to me, but a lot of people can, get test dumps. And there's so many downsides of the certification industry where some certs have a little bit more what I call street credibility than other certs. And then you got the degrees, depending on the school and the program. I'm definitely a big fan of WGU, as much hatred as they get by some IT cyber pros out there. But WGU, for their bachelor's in particular, they put about, I think it's 14 certifications in that. So if you're someone that's 18, 19, going into that bachelor's program, you leave with about 10 certifications plus, which to me, that's a pretty good program that you can complete. Some people speed run it, and I get from the seasoned professionals why they sometimes are critical of it. But if you look at it through the lens of someone that just got out of high school and wants to do IT cyber, not that bad of a program that gives them a little bit of writing because you got to do a lot of writing assessments, but then it gives you that to where to pass that particular credit course, you need to go pass the certification. So I do think they're on to something in regards to the cybersecurity industry is giving that mixed, having certifications with the formal institutional education. I think that's the way to go. And I love that the program is not set in stone that you must do 2 years or 4 years, that you could work at your own pace. And I think that's what's helping a lot of folks, particularly people that already have young families. They got to put food on the table and pay the bills. I think it gives you that flexibility to do that distance learning. So I'm a big fan of WGU. But back to your question, yes, you got that whole throughout my career, certifications have played a tremendous role in advancing me into the different roles and to be able to wear the various hats that I've worn in my career.
So looking at the job field as it is today, as it's changing, what are some of the recommendations for someone coming into the field to take into consideration? Because I know when you and I started, it was the A plus, net plus, sec plus. That was the,
Company for
hey,
you.
this is the Bible. You need to do this because all jobs rely on this. But today with all the AI, all the BI, all the web development, all the other aspects of IT and security that have evolved, what recommendations do you give for folks today?
So I've mentored over 150,000 people through my master class, which I've helped a lot of people break into cybersecurity, right? And so I have two compounded statements I'm going to give here. The first thing I'm going to tell people is don't buy that course, don't buy that book, don't go ahead and buy that exam voucher yet. What I advise, this is again to answer your question, someone wanting to break into IT cyber, someone brand new coming into the pool, right? If it's low cost or no cost, is where your focus should be because you have hopefully time. You have more time than maybe you do money. Right? If you're, especially if you're out of high school or if you just dropped out of college and trying to figure out what you're going to do with your life, I encourage everyone watching right now that's even thinking about doing IT cyber that has not done it before. Is ISC Square started a program called 1 Million Certified in Cybersecurity. Now, I know a lot of people in cyber and my peers will probably criticize that certification because it carries no weight in the job market yet, because it is a true entry level cybersecurity cert. But what ISC Square is doing with this program, and the reason why I recommend it to everybody is because it's free. The training is free. and the cert is free. You get a free exam voucher. Now, my peers will argue, well, they're just trying to drum up membership numbers and AMF fees, and I get that argument. But for someone to just get a free training and free cert to get that, what I call that bare minimum foundation, level one, laid down, it's good for that. Because again, it also gets you in that practice of taking a test like a Pearson VUE or remote proctored. It gets you in that condition of doing your first exam because there's lots of anxiety of that first exam for all of us. We've been there before. So I highly recommend IC Square certified or CC certified in cybersecurity program because it's free, free training, free cert. I recommend that to everybody. And I usually tell people once you finish and accomplish that, come back to me and then we'll plan out step 2 and 3. So now on to the second compound of the statement is the step 2 and 3 is, hey, whether you got a LinkedIn profile or you're just going on Glassdoor or whatever job hunting site, monster.com, etc. I always ask people, where do you live or where do you want to live? Because that's important to all of us because some of us might be married, our wife and kids or our families are in that area. We can't really leave home because we have all the support from the family or for various reasons, you might not want to be ready to move, right? Because it's easy to tell people, oh, yeah, just move to DC. You could throw a rock and hit 20 jobs. Get it. But it's not for everyone, right? So I always start with people, where do you want to live? Where are you located? If you're located in like, Raleigh, North Carolina, then okay, find the job sites and start looking at what is the need and demand in your market for your area. How far are you willing to commute? I had the actual real conversations first because everybody can say, oh, dude, try hack me. Or you're focused on one facet of this big industry, hacking, pen testing, auditing. There's a lot of merits there, a lot of great careers there, but that might not be in demand in your area. You might find out it's GRC work, governance risk compliance, where you might need to do some ISACA like a CISA, CISM, more audit focused and join groups that are focused in those areas, a chapter in your local your community or city. Again, that conversation, where do you live? Where do you want to live? Because if you're willing to travel, willing to move to a different continent, even, there's more opportunities, right? So I always focus on the where first. And then from there, let's look up in those areas that you'd like to live, consider to live, what's in demand right now? Because instead of me telling someone you need to get a Security Plus, a CISP, a CEH, like rattling off some certs, I could be completely wrong. What's needed in Raleigh, North Carolina is gonna be different than what's needed in, like, Offutt, Nebraska, or Rome, New York. These different Huntsville, Alabama, they're gonna have different needs with different certifications, different requirements. So I always tell people, research the need and become the need. Because I can sit here and tell you these 3 certs will get you 70, 80% of the jobs in the market, and I might be right, but it might not be 80% of the jobs in the market you're in. So that's the advice I would start people with.
And when it comes to like free certifications and free training, a lot of the cloud providers are also providing those free trainings. And the AI companies are also doing that now as well because they want everyone to become familiar with their tools. So if that is a need in your job market, make sure you consider that as well. So we talked about preparing for your interview. We talked about like looking for jobs in your area. How do you help folks with networking, or what tips do you recommend folks for networking and extending their reach to potentially make inroads into those potential jobs in their area?
You gotta learn from the greatest. Kevin Mitnick was a master of social engineering. And so it comes back to social engineering. I'm going to explain why. Everybody that's watching this podcast right now, if you don't have a LinkedIn account, get a LinkedIn account starting today. There's two best times to start a LinkedIn account, right? A year ago or today. And so today is the best time. Pause this video, go to LinkedIn, start your account. The reason why it is a professional social network. It's not Facebook, it's not Instagram, it is for professionals. And when I say professionals, those include program managers, hiring managers, and recruiters for these businesses. So when I said earlier about using like monster.com or different job sites to search what the need is in your area, you're going to find the companies that are in your area hiring for those needs. So what you could do is use a little bit of OSINT, go on these networks and look up these companies, start connecting with the program managers, the hiring managers, the recruiters for these companies. And often they also advertise their positions on LinkedIn that you can apply through LinkedIn. And then you can send a message. You could say, use a GPD to help you formulate that initial conversation, but to say, hey, I just applied to this position. Is there any more information you can give me? By just reaching out and pinging someone, asking for more information or something shows you have interest. And every little action you take is a way of what I call differentiating yourself from the herd of people that are going to apply. Like if you look at a LinkedIn job posting, well, that's another conversation. But Let's say you see a job post and you got like 1,000 people have applied to the job. I get it. There's 1,000 resumes, right? But the goal is how do you distinguish yourself? So by just having these informal conversations and chat messages on like LinkedIn is something that will separate you from everybody that's only click and apply, and they just become part of that digital repository of resumes. Whereas you've actually made a connection with someone, inquired about a job, they're at least going to pull up your file, maybe look at your resume a little bit closer, and you might raise the chances of getting an interview. And that's what it's about. Is get your LinkedIn profile going, do a little bit of what I call social engineering, because you might not find the job that moment, but by building your network with recruiters, hiring managers, and program managers, you're going to follow some of their feeds where they might say, "Hey, we have an opening for a SOC analyst." And you're like, "Wow, I've been looking for this job. I've been waiting for it." And you see it on your LinkedIn feed instead of having to wait for job alerts to come to your inbox. You could be getting it directly from the managers in the company. And a lot of managers and executives do promote positions, and particularly within their own internal teams. I mean, I can't tell you how many countless ones I've seen in the past year, but the people do advertise and want to find the right people for their organizations.
And when it comes to, so you mentioned some of the challenges when it comes to like LinkedIn jobs and some of the herds of applications. What are some of the other ways that you would recommend folks to differentiate themselves?
Think about how many resumes you've looked at of your own and other people's resumes, right? And most resumes are structured almost the same, right? It starts off with like name, contact information, maybe a few acronyms of certs. It may have a clearance if you're working in the defense industry. And then you get that paragraph that everybody has, right? That almost says the same thing. It says, I'm a this, I've done this, worked my way from this. It's a bio, right? A short bio. And then you start getting the same sections of work experience, degrees, educations, training certs. You know, we usually all resumes have these same sections. And of course, you hear the rules. Your resume should only be 2, 3 pages max. You hear all these different criteria. What I tell people is you got to, again, look for ways to have a differentiator to separate you from the herd of resumes. So the first thing I usually tell people is that everything that when you're applying for a certain job, let's say the job requires, and I'm just, again, this is just an example, but let's say it requires a security plus, a secret clearance, and a bachelor's degree. Most people, and again, it's weird how people will decide where did they put their degree at. Some people like to put the degree after employment history. They'll put the degree and it's usually on the last page, right? Well, there's a case if I'm a hiring manager and I have to at least get those three check boxes to even call you for an interview, and I've got to go through 1,000+ resumes from my LinkedIn job posting, I don't have time to flip and thoroughly read all 2 or 3 pages. So I advise everybody is to put the most important things in your job market, which whatever the requirements are, it needs to be on the top 1/3 of your page. So if you got what cert you got, put a running list of the certifications you have. If you got a bachelor's of science, information assurance, cybersecurity, whatever that may be, the year you got it. And then, so yeah, put your degree information, your cert information. And if your job is in the defense industry, clearly put your clearance there. Look up NSA recommendations for resumes, and one of the top bullets on that list from the National Security Agency is do put your clearance level on your resume. So folks out there saying you can't put your clearance on your resume, I'm going to squash that for you right now. But back to my point is your first third of the resume needs to have check. You need to be thinking, I need to check the boxes for the hiring manager. Make it easy for him to move you to the, okay, let's look at him for an interview pile, right? So you need to go from the big pile of mess to the we're going to consider these people for interview, and you make it easier for the hiring manager, putting all the critical, what I call the checklist information of the requirements of the job in the first third of that resume. And then on the end of the resume, put a section. There's 2 sections your resume is missing. First section is awards and recognition. What awards and recognition? All of us have gotten an award from some time or the other. It doesn't have to be a big like cybersecurity leader of the year award, but it could just be employee of the month, employee of the quarter. It could just be excellence appreciation award that your program manager gave you. But what that does is by putting these different recognitions and awards there, it knows that you've been recognized for doing the extra mile type of work. Those are the kind of employees that people want to hire, the people that have been recognized for good work. And what better way to do it than showing that you won some awards, right? Then the last section after that is hobbies and interests. And so, folks, you've never heard about this on a resume, and that's why it's going to make you stand out from the pack. Whatever your hobbies and interests are, if you like to restore classic cars, put some cars that you restored. If you're just an avid sports fan, maybe name your sports team. The goal of the interview is to make a personal networking connection, not the technical networking term. You want to really connect with that hiring manager. And so the sooner you can go for what I call a formal interview where they're asking you kind of like interrogative type questions, your work experience, like doing a standard interview, you want to switch from that formal interview to an informal when they finally say, "Hey, I see you put that you're a Steelers fan. Y'all had a rough couple of past seasons." Now you're talking informally. You're building a rapport with that hiring manager, right? And so even if it's just you're a fan of the Steelers, and that's just in my one example, what happens is when they go back and look at the resumes and the names, they're going to associate that conversation, the feeling they had talking to you, and that's going to give you more weight in that final decision. Did they go with Jim or did they go with Billy? Well, Billy, he was technically all right, but I just go either way with him. But Jim, we talked about him being a Steelers fan. You know, he met Palomalu once. What a great story. And the fact that he told that story so great, I think he'd fit really well in with our team. Me and Billy might have had the same search, same degree level, same experience level, but it comes down oftentimes, folks, to a feeling. How did the hiring manager feel about during your interview? So those two sections, awards lets him know this guy's been recognized by leadership and managers for good work. And hobbies and interests gives us something in an interview to talk beyond the job where we can get a little rapport going, get a human connection going.
Nice. So you mentioned that you do a course. Tell us a little bit about your course and what you do.
So years ago during COVID, it was February of 2020 when the whole Curb the Spread campaign was going. So I had a friend of mine that was sitting in a bank parking lot ready to take out a 10K plus loan from this bank to do an online course to get into IT cyber. And of course, she knew me. She was like, let me just call Jim and run this course by him before I make this significant commitment because she had just lost her job in the oil and gas industry due to the COVID shutdown. So she sent me the link. I looked at her, of course. I'm not going to name the university, but they weren't the only ones at that time. Every university out there were promoting this distance learning, remote learning, IT cyber courses. And in this particular course's case, it was zero certifications and it was over $10,000. And after 6 months, she would only get a piece of paper and it was not ANSI accredited either. So she would have an unaccredited course that she was paying for that gave her no weight in the job market. I just told her point blank. I said, look, don't go sign for that loan. I would rather you take two boot camps, even though I'm not a huge fan of boot camps, but I would rather you spend $10,000 on two or three boot camps than to give it to this university. But before you even spend a dollar, and I come back to what my mantra always starts with is I'm going to send you some YouTube channels. I'm going to send you some documents to read. And at the time, ISC Square didn't have their million certified in cybersecurity, but I want to give you the free resources to start training and studying up on first because it costs you just your time. And if you get that and you can understand those things, then I can navigate you through what the first cert you're going to target in the second and third. But then after that interaction, I saw obviously with the conversation, all my social media feeds just flooded with all these cyber courses, online courses. And it made me disgusted how during a very challenging time in our nation where these university institutions that you want to trust, you want to trust a university, a college to do
Mhm.
an ethically sound thing, but they were taking advantage of people that were losing their jobs, trying to pivot over because every company still had their IT shops working because they had to set up the VPNs,
Mhm.
image clients. They were full time working. So people, because of that, and they keep hearing the shortage of IT cyber jobs, people were trying to flock, figure out how do I get it? How do I break in this industry? And they were, to me, in my opinion, taking advantage and price gouging people with
Agree.
thousands of dollars. So when I started Top Cyber Pro, I talked to my business partner and I said, look, I want to do something that's month by month, cancel anytime. I don't lock people into contracts or anything, but I want to take my master class that was based on my best-selling ebook on Amazon for over 14 years at the time, that had helped over 150,000 people get their certification. So I did my own videos, created the own educational tools to teach people how to break down problems, how to effectively pass certification exams. And there's about a total of 16 certifications that masterclass helps you pass. And many of my students go on what I call the cert run. Once they get the first one, they're like, wow, it's really that easy. They'll get like Sec Plus, CISP, a couple concentrations, a couple other certs from, let's say, like EC Council or from CompTIA. So I've had a lot of people do about 5+ certifications within the first year of learning the master class. And then masterclass doesn't stop there. I mean, because once people get their certs, they need a little bit of the guidance on like building up their resume. So I have courses on some of the things I just mentioned already about the awards and the hobbies and interests, but kind of, how to conduct themselves in an interview, a little bit of courses on how to do effective negotiations on salaries and so forth. So, it kind of helps people break in with the certifications, get their resumes up to spec of where they need to be competitive in the market, and then how to conduct themselves in interview and the negotiation on the offer. So I try to help people kind of cradle to grave till they get to the job. And I'm proud to say that I've helped so many people go from really low salaries in career fields to really achieving 6+ figure salaries. I helped the person that was in the Air Force, just turned 22 years old. got a job in Honolulu, Hawaii. He's making 170K a year, 22 years old. Now, of
Nice.
course, but for his first job to be a high six-figure job, first job is tremendous. And I've helped others, largely from military transitioning over into the civilian world, but also helped people that were mid-career, people that have hit what I call their ceiling in their career. They've worked, 15 years and they can't get any higher unless an executive or two dies or retires above them, but they're still young. So they're like, I hit my ceiling, and they've lateraled over into cyber and also find themselves in like deputy to director roles, within the first year of switching over. And it's been tremendous to see people really flourish.
Yeah, I did something similar about the same time with Paul Cummings. We set up a nonprofit called the Whole Cyber Human Initiative. We went out and we pulled in all of the open source training that was available
Mhm.
and created a guided course to take them from zero to hero. So from zero to a cyber warrior or zero to a cyber defender. And I've since not been as active with it, but they've been flourishing. I helped in the early days with really setting up the curriculum, understanding what the business needs were, talking with recruiters and directors, understanding where the gaps were from when they were hiring just out of college students or transfers, like you mentioned, and where they needed those technical skills, and then ensuring that we had courses that met that ability for them to be able to do that. So, not just, hey, I could do a NESA scan, but let's do a NASA scan and then write up a vulnerability assessment with a mitigation plan for a business, highlighting what the gaps are, what your approach is to mitigate those gaps, and why that's important, so that they get into that approach of, this isn't just about clicking the cyber tools, but like you said earlier in your CompUSA story, this is about providing the business with options on what they need to do to remediate their situation. Really love that approach. Definitely share the links with me. I'll put them in the show notes, share them at the end. And I guess one of the small things I've done lately is I created an app that would help people track their applications and then also help them create those resumes that go back to the core requirements of their application, help judge them on how their resume matches to that application
Neat.
before they go ahead and submit, so that they're not just, hey, taking the same resume and submitting it
Yeah.
all the time.
Blasting over and over.
And also matching it back to things like NIST requirements and kind of taking those items into consideration. So I'll share that in the link as well. But Jim, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much. And it's pleasure's all mine.